guys, as many of you have asked me how I color graded this image from being this to this. Let me show you again. This to this. It's pretty easy and quite simple on how I achieve this look. First of all, I want you to take a look at the histogram. So there are no whites in the image. There are very less highlights in the image. A lot of midtones are there. A lot of darks, and a lot of shadows are there in the image. And that's what the secret sauce is for the film look and for the cinema look. So the first thing I did was I left the temperature right there, but I went to the exposure and contrast first. I changed the exposure to plus 35. I did not change the contrast at first, just leave it for the last part. And then I went ahead to the highlights, shadows, whites and blacks. I pulled down the highlights to minus 51, pulled up the shadows to plus 26. The reason is that I don't want to introduce a lot of bright shadows in the image. I pulled down the whites to minus 32, as you can see that in the histogram as well, and that's the cinema look that I was going for. And in the cinema, in the film, you don't see a lot of whites. That's the reason I pulled it down. For the blacks, I just left it there. For the texture, clarity, and dehaze, I did not introduce any dehaze into the image because it was fairly, it was okay. But if I would have included the dehaze, it would have made the image a lot more contrasty, and I didn't want that. And same goes for the clarity as well. For the texture, I went down to minus 11. I could have left it to 0, but I just went down to minus 11. It's just a personal preference. For the vibrance, I went up plus 9, and the reason is because I wanted more cooler tone in the image. And as you can see in the background, there are a lot of cooler tones in the image. Then I went to do the tone curve. In the tone curve, I did, first of all, I just pulled down the whites of the image and I pulled them down to the input of 237 and the output, no, wait a minute. Yeah, to the input of 237 and the output of 237 as well. And for the blacks, I raised them up so that I can get a more of that faded look, but not a lot. So I just did input 0 and output 6, or maybe just keep it at 7, whatever suits you. I did not do much in the RGB channel. So in the blue channel, I just pulled down the highlights to 196 and the output is 165. And to the shadows, I did almost where they were, input 60, output 67. For the blacks, I did not change them anything. Then I went for the color grading tab. The color grading tab, this is where the magic happens actually. So if I toggle this off and on, you can see what difference it makes to the image. There you go, it's a lot more warmer. If I turn it on, it's a lot more cooler. The reason is because in the shadows, I went for the hue of 213 and the saturation of 20. For the highlights, I did the hue of 48 and the saturation of 25. For the luminance in the shadows and in the highlights, I did not change it at all. But you can also go ahead and play with this. If you decrease the luminance in the shadows, it's gonna darken the blues, and so goes for the highlight. If you decrease it here, it's gonna darken the red part of the image, and I did not want to do it because the highlights are more warmer in the image. For the detail, leave it right there for now. Jump right over to calibration. In calibration, I then went for the blue primary to minus 35 and saturation minus 25. This is how you get the teal and orange look. I did not want the proper teal and orange look in the image, but I wanted just a hint of it. So that's the reason I went for minus 25 on the saturation, but I still wanted it in the image, so minus 35 on the hue. For the green primary, the hue I used was plus 35 and the saturation plus 9. This makes the yellows of the image a lot more reddish, and yeah, that's pretty much it. For the red primary, I used the hue of plus 23 and saturation of +21. If you move the slider right here and here, you can see what difference it makes into the image. I did not want a lot of reddish skin tones. That's why I chose +30 or something like that. Saturation to +21. I wanted more saturated colors, but you can obviously go ahead and put that on 0 if you want. I just put it right there. For the shadows, I chose +7 because it was a lot cooler and I did not want to introduce any greens in the image. So that's the reason I chose +7 for the shadows. Yeah. Okay, then I went for the HSL slider, and here I changed the hue of orange to +12. If I move the slider, you can see it's making the skin tones a lot more reddish and a lot more darker. That's why I didn't want that. I went the saturation -10 because it was a lot saturated in my opinion. The luminance I did was +12. For the yellows, I just went for the saturation -20. I did not do much in the green, aqua. In the blues, I did the hue of -23 because I wanted those blues to be on the teal side rather than to be on the purple side of the image. So the saturation I left it there. The luminance I went for -40. In the reds, I didn't do it much, and yeah, that's pretty much it. That's almost done right there. If you want, you can go ahead and play with the exposure and contrast. I did the contrast +23 because it was needed. The image was looking a lot more flat. That's why I introduced +23 on the contrast. For the exposure, I raised the exposure at first +35, but I don't like it, so I'm gonna go ahead with um, 0 exposure on there. Now you can choose your temperature right there. You can go for you can play with it a little bit. It was daylight, but it was a lot cloudy, so I'm gonna go put my image on the cloudy, and that's where I'm getting the best results, as you can see. So I like the cloudy look of the image, and that's pretty much it. Now you can go ahead and do the sharpening and do the noise reduction if you want. I didn't do the noise reduction because the exposure was pretty spot on, and that's why I didn't want to do any noise reduction here, because it makes the image look a lot more softer, and I didn't want that. For the color noise reduction, it's basically the blending of the colors, so I did 25 there, and that's pretty much it. Do the highlight, priority, post, crop, vignetting to -7. Don't go more than -10 on this one. That's gonna look weird. So I just did -7, -9, leave it right there, and put it some grain in this. The reason I did the grains because I just love the way the film looks, and it has a lot of grain in it, and that's the reason I put the grain in it. So that's pretty much it, and then I exported the image with the Instagram export settings. That's it. Thank you. You can apply these settings into your images, make a preset with it, play with it, have fun. Thank you guys.